Okay, so now we move into 1812. And I believe this says until summer. Yeah, okay. And that is right, I think. Is it? When did Prussia surrender? Summer of 11. I may have the year wrong. Summer of 11. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. No, this should be 1813. Prussia is not available yet. There's a 6-turn minimum on those enforced pieces. Anyway, so what has happened in 1811? Well, opportunities in mid-year for Austria and Spain to jump into the war were neglected or refused or whatever, and in part because of the limited diplomacy that's allowed in this game anytime other than the spring turns. Actually, it's the spring diplomacy phase, not the spring interface. Okay. And Prussia ended up surrendering, I think in the autumn. And now you've got a French invasion of Russia being undertaken. Meanwhile, Turkey's still at war with Russia. However, Turkey's in a very interesting position, and I have to think about their position. They probably are willing to, at the end of 1812, they should be willing to come to a peace with the Russians. There's very little for them to gain, or else to ally with the French. I think they will hold on to their current situation because they don't believe the Russians have the opportunity to slam into them really hard. And there may be advantages to staying at war and maybe joining the French. But here's what we've lost. The Ottoman Empire has fallen because Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia have been grabbed by the Brits during this past year. And now we're in a situation where Spain and Austria will get a chance to rebuild their armies. Neither one has all their forces on the board. Russia will also get to rebuild its forces. But we're losing the opportunity. There was a period where Prussia had a pretty big army, but they got themselves slammed by delaying their surrender for another turn, sometime in the middle of things. They kind of bought into the English plot, but then ended up getting caught by Napoleon and having, their asses kicked around a little bit, which is okay. By 1813, they'll have enough time to rebuild their army. That was part of it, is like, whoa, they're not going to get their whole army rebuilt in this year. And yeah, I just had them on the wrong year. But otherwise, everyone's available to jump into the war. And France may be in some trouble if that happens, because all we have is Suchet, right? Yeah, Suchet. His army of Spain, which is quite far from Spain at this point. The rest of the French armies, and they've got them all built, are, within my cheating rules, are pressing into Russia. Quite a large army, actually. And also Poland was formed out of the Prussian surrender. That was the big deal out of it. What was the other? The other commitment was continental system. Because France is going to need to start picking people off to keep the continental system in place. It has to be in place pretty much everywhere. According to the it's weird. According to the Banania rules, everywhere in Europe, Turkey and the Ottoman Empire, the North African portion, are not counted in it, nor is Scandinavia. My feeling is that you should be able to trade things off to some extent, which is to say, well, if Turkey's at war with Britain, they're not trading with the Brits. So they kind of become part of the continental system, which then means that maybe I could trade Spain away, which is about the same size as Turkey in terms of total trade or whatever. And just try to make something, as long as it feels like I'm doing as much harm in trade, I allow it. Wow, this battery's dying too. Anyway, we had a pretty exciting last couple of years in terms of what's been happening. In terms of my excitement about the game, not so much. Especially this last year, it really decayed quite a bit. How much I'm enjoying. I had a little bit of a resurgence when I thought Turkey might win the game through a weird sort of stab, but that doesn't look like it's going to happen. It looks like it's going to go out to the end, which is actually 1814, not 1815 for some reason. And then we just count victory points, and I guess there's probably a Waterloo scenario somewhere in there. I have no interest in playing it. You know, I wanted a grand campaign from 1792 to 1815, or maybe even beyond, to the fall of France kind of thing, or something. I want some kind of conclusive result. That's one thing I like about Empires in Arms. I think it does have a fixed date of ending, but you're not going to reach that usually, because somebody will hit their victory points and they'll have put themselves in a good enough position. But I don't know. Maybe I don't like that either. Maybe I like War and Peace better. That has its fixed end point, but it's like, did France survive? That's good enough. I don't know. Anyway, we're not going to play right now, but we have the whole economic phase and all that to do. It's a little weird. You know, I had something in mind and now it's not coming to my head. Yeah, is that you're kind of looking to position yourself to be in a position to take big victories at the end of the game, because it's going to be your end game position that matters most. But, you know, those can build up over time. But I think one of the keys here is you're going to have to take out the miners and whatnot and have that all set up at the right time. And, you know, what locations you're sitting in or whatever, that's what your victory points, I think, are based on. Which means, like, not defeating France might be worth more to people who are doing well in France. Peek at that. It's control of a victory point city. So if somebody owns Paris, they get 3 victory points. Now, there's no way to own Paris if France has surrendered. So you actually want to, if you're the person who's going to take things in France, the most stuff in France, which is worth a decent amount of victory points for the most part, you want it to all be kind of not with a French surrender in 1814. You don't want to defeat France. If you defeat France, or if they cut deals and surrender or whatever, you may end up in, it's a negotiated peace, whatever the free peace that would allow for this. But you're going to end up in a situation where, like, you could lose all the points in France if they actually did surrender. So you're going to have some really weird endgame play, much as you've had weird play surrounding the automatic victory conditions, where, like, oh yeah, both Russia and France, who are at war with each other, want to prevent Turkey from taking Kiev. You know, whatever they have to do to manage that. Just weird shit in this game. And leads to it. I mean, the core systems don't work. The base victory points that this campaign uses, which I don't consider a core system, doesn't work. Just nothing works in this game. It's all just like this mishmash of stuff that, like, maybe with a hell of a lot of massaging, you could get a good game out of. But I'll tell you, there's no way that simple errata could do it, which is what the Banania rules attempt to do. So maybe the other fan-based rules compilation, which actually changes the game, might do a better job. I don't know. But I know this much. what I got here doesn't do it. And doesn't show signs of a game that would be easily, that like through maybe 6 months or a year of development would likely hit something that was polished. And you would have to rework everything. Really, almost every system in the game would have to be redone. At worst, and especially if you want that full 1792 to 1815 campaign that the game sort of tries to promise in some sort of way, the deck of cards is insufficient. And the deck of cards is one of the problematic things. It needs a reworking to the extent that like new cards need to be put in, or some other kind of rules, like ditch the cards and make up a new system to handle that kind of shit. There's just nothing in this game that works. This Monday, I managed to do, I don't know how much, a little bit of yard work, enough that like, yeah, my body's not thrilled with me. Working on the hell is hard, but I've gotten so that everything is difficult. Anyhow, I guess we're on the card phase. Now, we shuffle these fuckers first, and there aren't a lot of them, but then it's now 1812. I screwed up on my first labeling. We got 2 new cards to come in. Those will go to the last player. Now 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So one of these will go to Britain, one of these will go to France. The rest of these will be shuffled out. I know that it comes to 9 unless France maybe gained another one, which they may have done. Let's see what the totals are. But, like I was saying, I think at the end of the last video, there's no system in this game that is solid, right? There's so much fucked up with the card system. There's so much fucked up with the cumbersome nature of the stacking, which is really kind of the funky thing. Do I think the stuff in here, like the straight up combat system is workable? Yeah, it kind of is. It's not that bad. But it is a kind of cumbersome system where you have to work through this chart and you have to do a lot of different comparisons all over the place. It's not as good a system as more complex games that handle things, I feel, in a better way. I'm thinking here more the EU EIA model, which is very strong. But also games that really go into the specifics where, you're putting a unit forward or whatever, something like La Grande Guerre, where you're matching up a couple of units against each other for the fighting. That has a really workable system where you're not having to look shit up constantly. I just feel like I'm always I don't like these kind of lots of modifier, a big list of modifiers to a simple combat results table. I don't think they are particularly, they can work fine. For example, Summer Storm used one of them, but they're very cumbersome for me to use. Obviously, naval stacking is maybe even worse than land stacking. The weirdness around the detachments and all that. And then we get into all the big stuff. And the big stuff is, the campaign-oriented stuff and everything is just incomplete and needs fixes. Yeah, I was talking about the cards in particular, and somebody else commented on that. But the real problem with the cards is that you would need to make a new deck of cards. Or figure out some way to get rid of the cards and script the information into them or something. Maybe you could use... So, if you wanted to do, and I talked about this before, the 1792 to 1815 or whatever, you would have to have specific, events that are sort of scripted in the way the cards are, but that don't exist yet, right? So you'd have to create more stuff. I really don't think the handling of the cards in people's hands is particularly useful, especially when, and one suggestion, this guy made was, geez, there should be a hand size limit because this is fucking ridiculous, okay? He's got a big chunk of the deck, and that's part of why we're not getting the cards here. But man, I don't think that's enough. It catches some of it, but it's like the fact that the game would have such a different flow in terms of the mandatory events and all that. Not so much the other cards, just the mandatory events. By the number of players that are in the game. It's fucking weird. Like, the game should be designed so that the same number of cards comes out, no matter how many players you have. So, if more or less, maybe the neutrals draw some cards and they get thrown away or whatever, right? But if somebody's part of one of the blocks, in say a 2-player game or whatever, their cards should go into that coalition. And it kind of feels that way when you look at the setup for the 1792, like Prussia has a card, Britain has a card. The rules to the 1792, there's no victory conditions for that scenario that work multiplayer. The victory conditions are is a 2-player game. So it's not like you have a multi-sided system. Anyway, let me figure out who gets what cards. Kind of a funny parallel that's on my mind, because the other thing on my mind other than this game is how hard it is for me to fucking do anything. My plan for today had been to go out and do something. Didn't really matter what. Maybe go to Goodwill, look for clothing. I need clothing. Maybe just go for a walk. Might still do it. I'm not going to go all the way out to Goodwill. That's like a 2-hour walk or whatever to the one that I wanted to go to, which is part of why I don't go. It's just too far and not a pleasant walk. But anyway, I replaced that with, it's a cool day. It would be a nice day for me to do some yard work. So I went out and did some and whatever. But I still didn't do the kind of things I need to do, the kind of things I need to catch up with. Yes, I need to do the yard work too. I have more yard work when you include the wood that I have to cut and everything than, I'm ever going to catch up with, is basically the problem at this point. Like, I've got vines I've got to trim and whatnot. But then a couple of other things showed up. Inheritance-related stuff. I've got like a couple of things I've got to cope with there. I just got a new packet today that I have to deal with. And it's just like, I'm as broken a person as this game is a game, is kind of the thing that I'm kind of trying to get to here, is that how badly formed this is. Yeah, it can put on a facsimile of a game, and you really maybe can massage the shit out of it and make it kind of work. That's sort of how my existence is, Somebody sees me going, outside. I don't look like a homeless person usually. I go to the bar. Yeah, I'm weird, but there's something wrong there, but there's something kind of attractive about it, I guess. But then the underlying, like everything that, makes people like my neighbors across the street and everything capable of functioning in this world, that's just so broken in me, in the same sort of way that this game's rules are broken. And maybe that's why I feel forced to go and compelled to play something so fucked up, is that, who am I to judge this game? I don't know. All right. Factor about the cards that I don't think I've mentioned before. The mandatory public events that are one-timers, those are sitting. Oh, I forgot to roll for that. I don't have to roll for Bolivar. He can't end yet, but... okay. The Brits are going to get the U.S. back. And this would go up to a +2. Bolivar, this is the first year, so they get this. But these mandatory public events, those in the multiplayer game, like this, where the deck runs out, are gonna always end up in the same player's hands. Well, maybe, maybe not. It may influence, how many cards you want to throw in this thing. Because Spain is going to get the first card. Turkey's going to get the next card, right? So I think there were like 7 of these. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. France is going to get the next 2. And maybe one of those. But like, these guys are where the public mandatories show up, which may give you power, may not, but they're certainly not, as flexible and strong as like the Art of War card that gives you a +2 in a single combat or something. I don't know. Being able to control a foreign war might be cool. Most of them, though, they feel relatively weak. Anyway, let's get these Brits in this pile too. I do a contemplation of the cards. England ended up getting both the new cards, the 1812 cards, and only they get them. Great. France ended up with the public inflation card. This kind of weird, but diplomacy comes after the play of these cards. So this nationalism card, which is a public card and must be played, is played by the Austrian bloc. Austria is on its own at this point in the game. They haven't joined an alliance. Had they joined an alliance, then they would be able to negotiate whether or not they want to play, or the Brits do, or maybe Austria has to play anyway and Britain just gets locked out. Who knows? But Britain has the Third Rome, which we would rather not play, right? We've been able to delay it, and they are the only player in the coalition bloc with a public event. They got this melee. If Napoleon is outside France, he's deployed immediately to Paris and a new army leader replaces him. That's an interesting little card. I don't know if I want to play that or not. It's not a public event, but it is a one-time event. Kind of feels like it shouldn't be. Napoleon got called back a couple of times later in his career. But then I also have this conscription refusal. But it's a public one-time that hurts France by 1/4 of her francs and 1/5 of her maximum CU level. France doesn't have a lot of troops to build. So I think I'm going to hit the nasty Third Rome instead. And, well, that other public event, I'll come up next turn, but it affects the next spring reinforcement phase, which comes after the events, which means that the money and manpower losses will apply to 1813 instead of 1812, if I can remember them. Oh boy. 3 mandatory publics were required. Nationalism, a mandatory alliance can be broken according to the rule. Can be? What the fuck? It's a public mandatory event. That card just gets thrown away every time because there aren't any mandatory alliances. But okay. There could be, but nobody's taken them. That puts the next one to the French, who are picking inflation against the Brits, I guess, to cut $10 from them. I could cut the money from someone else. But honestly, Britain can give the money to anyone else. And I feel like it's more effective to take directly from Britain in that case. And then the third Rome is being played against the Russians, which is going to deplete their manpower and money, well, their troops. They're going to have to build troops to send to that foreign war. And I am going to break, and I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm strongly considering sitting out on the porch, smoking a cigar, and having a chocolate milkshake. It's past 11 on Monday night, 11:30. And again, you know, just bullshitting around my time trying to avoid getting to play. But in the economic phase, I run into something. I always clear the money here. And for the most part, hey, it doesn't make much difference. It's just of no importance. But I noticed the Austrian money being so high. And I have Schwarzenberg, who could command a third army. I have other people who could as well. He might be a better choice for other things. But I think I'm going to use the money retroactively last turn during the reinforcement phase to buy myself some the army of Bohemia. I don't think there's anything else that Austria has that they could buy. So that's fine. We might have some leaders coming in now as well. As we get deeper and deeper into this scenario, the changelog aspect, dealing with this, rolling back, you know, things that are lost, adding things that are gained, etc., is really becoming quite painful. Luckily, it's not a continuous changelog, I guess. I don't know. It's just really painful because there's no easy representation. Again, take a look at the Empires in Arms board where you can just kind of look. There aren't a lot of provinces that change hands in it because there's less than there are in this game. Again, things like, what is it, Brunswick, are just sort of abstracted away. And they don't really matter, right? Like, they're just gone. Whereas that could be, and stuff like Mecklenburg and stuff, yeah, it's on the board and it has an effect. When it's captured, it's got its numerical value written right on the board. So you can just look at the board, see what's been taken, and get get a visual representation of what, of what's where, as opposed to this referencing back and forth. Look, I basically have to look at multiple different things. What's on the board might have some effect. The chits that I have in a couple of different places have an effect. That chart has an effect. And it all gets compared to who owned what on this chart based on the scenario that I'm playing as to rolling things back. But sometimes you have to look into the, into not the 1805 scenario for how much a province is worth, because it might not be in the same situation in hands that it was in. And it's just like, fuck, what are you doing this all for? Like some of them have lost their trade values because they don't get them, because in the 1805 scenario they wouldn't get them if they were aligned with the with the French side of things. And it's just it's painful. Everything should be easy to assess, and it really is in Empires in Arms. What you do is you take a look. Each nation has its own total money and manpower. Manpower doesn't change in this, except in cases where it does, right? But Each nation has its own money and manpower. Each province has its own money and manpower. And you can just take a look. What provinces have I lost since the beginning of the game? It only has one start date, so one core start date. Sure, you can play scenarios that are others, but those scenarios are still based off the initial starting position. And you can figure out the income by simply adding and subtracting whatever you've gained and lost to those totals. And then you throw trade into it. And it all works really easily. Whereas this is just such a fucking pain in the ass. Anyway, as sort of a sop, because Prussia has been neutered quite a bit by taking the Polish provinces, they do get the landwehr, which gives them, essentially an extra 21, no, not 21, an extra amount of money that's kind of variable, because the supposed landwehr give you 3 additional infantry steps. Oh, look, I built the guards out of landwehr. Yeah, that doesn't make much sense, right? But that meant that I got $5 plus 1, I think, because it has an artillery, yeah. I got $6 and a step there. And then elsewhere I built an infantry corps, but if I was more careful, I could have done it cheaper and actually probably have another buck. So we'll just give them that. Because I bought more than one infantry corps. I could have bought the second step of each infantry corps, which cost 4 instead of 3, because they have an artillery included in them, And I'm not getting anything that's like landwehr out of this, right? There is no militia on the Prussian side. There's also no Freikorps, which I find kind of funny. I expect them to be around. They show up in both War and Peace and in Empires and Arms. But there's no equivalent to that, which was, again, sort of when the landwehr were called up, they also, they also managed to get these other suboptimal quality. I don't want to say suboptimal, but it's the only word I can think of right now. These lower quality troops that are Cav, kind of like Cossacks are, right? I don't think the Austrians do either, for that matter. Well, yeah, they do. They have something, which I can't use yet, which is these frontiers, which are just infantry frontier troops. So neither side really has the Freikorps idea of raising. Now, for the Austrians, it's more like the Hungarian forces that were called up, I think. But in either case, they're meant to be able to kind of screw around with supplies and stuff like that more than they are to really do a lot on the field. And I'm finding myself, much as the only other person who seems to be sticking with this, who knows the game, has as an impression of it, I find myself not really utilizing cutting supply or whatnot very often. Now, he did come up with some interesting ideas, which is that, you can move against a force. So when I was mentioning you can catch people, up in Brittany or something, he brought up something else, which is that you could swing a bunch of troops around to surround a demoralized force so it can't retreat. And that is true. That is true. And you can't use extended movement for that, because you can't move adjacent to the enemy with extended movement. But you don't have to worry about army reaction moves or anything like that with a demoralized force. So it is one way of kind of eliminating the demoralized forces that I haven't really paid enough attention to. I also probably am not paying enough attention to trying to cut off supplies by sending units all over the place. You know why? Because outside of the idea of Freikorps and the like, that really wasn't Napoleonic warfare. Napoleonic warfare wasn't about temporarily cutting someone's supplies with a small force moving out of the range. Except maybe in Russia and in Spain and stuff like that, where there are special troops which are capable of doing that. So it doesn't really come to my mind as much, and it feels artificial if it is possible to do. Now, we've been able to work around some things to cause supply cuts like that. And I guess you could argue in the seasonal scale of this that, yeah, maybe it kind of happens. But it feels so artificial to me that it would happen off of a counterplay, that I get a strong counter like a 1 that allows me to move everything and just be able to just decimate somebody's supply situation, which leads even more to this kind of standing off and not actually moving to engage each other, which again doesn't feel very Napoleonic if that were to start happening. I really don't think that the core movement system of this is believable. And I'm trying to play it more believably because it's easier to do that way. I'm not very good at the whole, oh yeah, let's slide some units over this way and cut off his supply and then slide around. I really don't. That's more of a classic Avalon Hill type strategy, where you're trying to slice units off, and some of the early SPI games too, as opposed to this more pulsed type, more modern games, where it really doesn't feel like you should have that kind of threat on you as often. Like, it feels like it's far too easy to cut somebody's supply. Where supply starts feeling more and more like a World War II type game than it does a Napoleonic period game. Where you get the right detail on that is probably the Zucker series, where yes, you can cut supplies and you can do all kind of nasty shit. And you do get some of that standoffish type behavior, but it's at such a lower scale that it makes more sense. And I don't know, it's got to be like 2:30 on Tuesday in the morning. Made myself coffee sometime close to midnight. And yeah, not a wise move if I'm going to be up during the day, but there's just something in me that, I don't know. I don't know what it is. Anyway, we have, first of all, the Russians doing the economic stuff, and the Russians ended up dispatching Barclay de Tolly, which is actually a big deal because it means I have to use, I needed a 3-star for this third Rome card. It means I have to use Alexander in the field, which I'm not really thrilled about. But if I'm going to have 3 armies on the board, I've only got 3 3-star commanders and then Alexander. Although I could actually shift more troops into his force because he can have a bigger force. But that kind of thing doesn't matter. What matters generally is like the big multiples. And so like an army that's a little beaten up or a little bit smaller than another army, that's almost no importance at all. It doesn't affect the odds ratio as far as I can tell, because the way I'm handling it, you have to exceed. So like, to get to the 1 to 2 table, to get the 1 to 2 penalty, you essentially have to actually have the opponent be twice the size, not just be a little under their size. That feels more natural to me. I don't know if that's what's intended. But anyway, The other thing, I'm getting to the French, and the French and the English are the two really hard ones to do. Granted, Prussia has had a lot of modifications. Austria's got modifications with East Galicia gone, but West Galicia still there. But West Galicia was included in the 1805 numbers, even though it's not in their initial borders. This is where this doesn't, where this is just a cumbersome and annoying facet. But for the French, I've made a slight difference to how I've been doing it. I took care of the British escort attacks before I do the French, which means that I have enough money, to buy replacement squadrons. I think I'm ready to cut though here. I did a couple of countries and I really hate doing the French and the Brits. They're just like the Brits, the hard part is figuring out the trade value. The French, it's hard everywhere because they're just so many modifications across the board. And I basically have to deal with the whole chart in a much more complex way. And I just don't feel like it. Personal side, I was wondering vaguely, whether or not like I'm finally going through a midlife crisis or something along those lines. But I've been like most of what I'm feeling, I've felt all my life, right? The inability to do things and stuff like that, I've always felt. There's certain other aspects of me that are like, yeah, I see myself giving up on certain stuff that was once more important to me in a lot of ways. But I did the same damn thing at other times. Like when my first wife booted me out, I spent a lot of time in my mom's basement when I wasn't in school, going back to school basically. Just, screwing around with video games and stuff like that. Some serious, some not. Playing the board games, but really kind of disassociating from life and not taking, not taking anything seriously. Now, I had to take other stuff seriously at other times, but whenever I had a break from that, I fell into this. This is sort of my habit. When I went to grad school, same kind of thing. I very much fell into this kind of, maybe not as bad as it is now. When I started working, that was different because I had to be somewhere for large portions of my day. And I don't know, it kind of freed me up from a lot of stuff. And then when I was back at home, working from home, which was always my goal and my ideal, that was sort of this slump downward, and we're talking a little after these videos started, to tell you the truth. Not too long after I was working from home from then on, and it's just been kind of this continuous thing. Now, one of the problems is that hope is kind of gone. Like there was always vaguely hope, but also there are other things that have kind of dropped away in the wayside, like going for walks and engaging in sort of this, fantasy existence or heavy thinking or whatever would happen while I went for the walks. That's not happening anymore, but that drifted slowly away in much the same way my drumming did, where it's like, yeah, it's still there and I can still tap it if I really need to, but it's not as important to me, and it's just kind of, I don't know, everything's just sort of fading away. And now, capacity to cope with stuff has faded away as well. What kind of led me to that question, though, was attempts to kind of recapture what I once was in some sort of way. I think in sort of much the same way that, like, oh, I used to be a studly guy and now I'm going to get myself a nice fast car or whatever, and it'll make me seem young again. This isn't about seeming young again, really. It's more about touching on the things that were kind of vital to me. Just kind of revitalizing my life, not necessarily any kind of, you're not going to see me run out and get a sports car or anything, right? What I'm reaching for, though, is my own equivalent, which is to kind of reestablish that sort of mystic connection or whatever. But in a lot of ways, it feels like I'm the same person. I'm just lazier. It's not like I ever gave up, like kind of the common view of like the midlife crisis type thing is this sort of, gosh, I forgot about all the stuff that was important to me. I don't know that I ever forgot about it, right? It's always been preying on me. But, the equivalent to me would be starting to go out for walks, leaving the house more, doing stuff, as opposed to like this sort of comfort zone type thing. And, just in sort of the same way that kind of like, oh yeah, I'm gonna run around in my little sports car instead of like, just being the family guy. Well, I was never the family guy, but I did have to kind of trade away things that were important to me, maybe in the same sort of way, and that's what it kind of feels like, is this aching, but it's an aching to restore what has slowly over decades disintegrated about my existence. I don't know. On the process of looking up the polls, because East Galicia doesn't come with manpower. In fact, the only Polish provinces that come with manpower are the three that make up Poland as of, now we could look. See, Poland's in 1806, in 1792. But it's not that big. And in 1792, I don't remember what it contains. I don't think it contains some of the Russian stuff. I think there's already been a partition at that point that's already included in that scenario. I'd have to look at the setup for it, but I remember Russia. Yeah, because Russia's home boundaries are here. Wow. So I don't know what's going on, but the initial Poland, which is just those three provinces by the 1792 borders, is supposedly in 1806. Masovia, Posen, and Galicia, the three provinces that make up the Grand Duchy of Warsaw when it is formed, total of 9-3. Again, it's like something's not working here. The 1792 scenario, yes, Poland underwent a partition in 1792. But it's not accounted for in those. But anyway, clearly there's supposed to be some degree of other forces. Now, what's available? Well, we have Podolia, East Galicia, Polesia, Lithuania. I don't think this is. This is White Russia. Which, yes, it was part of Poland at one point, but I don't think it's included in that. None of those provinces produce any manpower for Poland unless there's something special. So that's what I was looking up. But I found something equally disturbing about this scenario. Kingdom of Piedmont, Sardinia. This kingdom comprises Piedmont and Sardinia. When Piedmont is conquered and annexed to France, something that hasn't happened, Sardinia remains at war with France and becomes a minor country allied with Britain. Among the Piedmontese units, only the detachment is available. Let's take a look. Let's look at Piedmont. Piedmont was a 7-2 minor power associated with Austria, and then is a 5-2 minor power associated with France. Now, is Sardinia on here? Yeah. Sardinia is a 2-0 that starts out with Piedmont and then becomes a British minor ally. Something weird is going on here. These rules don't match with this minor power chart. It could be a typo on the chart. It could be a typo in the rules. Historically, there's a bit of a problem because this is a French ally 1805. French 1805 and Greater Empire, which kind of means it should be associated, like it should be conquered. I don't know. It needs to be for the victory conditions, but it starts out as a minor ally, and France has kept it as one. They've never lost it. If they did, I think they would have to absorb it that way. That's my taking of the rules, but the historical is that it was absorbed. I don't remember what year. I think it was 1802. I remember looking this up and seeing about it and saying, well, something's fucked up. And now we find another fuck up where I don't know what's supposed to happen. But in addition to that, the Piedmontese Corps and the Piedmontese leaders are permanently removed from the game when this happens. Now, we don't know what permanently means. Like, can Piedmont be reestablished? Again, permanently removed sounds like no, but we've seen other cases where that permanent then has rules that says it can be reestablished for other things. But here, Sardinia remains at war with France and becomes a minor country allied with Britain. Among the Piedmontese units, only the detachment is available. There's no manpower in Sardinia. They're trying to resolve this. Leads me to some kind of maybe Piedmont can be reestablished with just a detachment, but again, it's just not believable and it's not consistent looking. You might be able to come up with some hand-wavy argument for how it might work. Anyway, I'm going to look up the Poles, see if there's any special rules with them. I looked under special minors. They're not there, but they are in the created kingdoms as the Grand Duchy of Warsaw. So I'll look at that. Another thing that once it's conquered, it disappears permanently, like whatever that may mean, because again, they say the units are removed permanently from the minor powers when they're conquered. But then they can be reestablished. So it's like, what are you even talking about anymore? Yeah, there's just, again, like, there's things where maybe there was some intention that was understood by the playtesters or something and just didn't make it into the rules correctly. But it's so contradictory, you got no fucking clue what they're talking about. Boy. All right. So here it is. I screwed up. As soon as later, both of the other provinces showing Polish eagles, Posen and Western Galicia, can be added to the Grand Duchy. That indicates that what I did with East Galicia was illegal. I'm going to say it's legal, and I'm going to put associated manpower for Poland with it. Because, honestly, I think Poland should be able to be recreated as something greater. And I'm perfectly fine with that. and I would like to see it be able to get to the 18.6. Austria did not, Prussia may have needed the manpower from it. Screw it. I don't care. I'm going to just say that there was a point of manpower in that there's a point of manpower in each of the Ps. So, yeah, what essentially happens is the Grand Duchy can't go beyond its original historical borders. And here I'm bringing in some of my bias from something like Empires in Arms. Because I thought the distinguishing thing was the Ps, which is the original Poland, I guess, which for some reason disappears before the 1792 scenario, even though the 1792 scenario is when it's absorbed, and Poland is given an 18.6 size for the 1792 scenario, and yada, yada, yada. Now, historically, it happened midway through, or partway through 1792. Again, there needed to be a mechanism for the dissolution of Poland. Not what this game handles, but I don't care. I don't care. I'm going with what I've got, and I'm going to give Poland that extra manpower in addition to a 3-1 value, which is approximately what it should have. Now, what's fucked up about this as well is that Warsaw, if I can find it, Warsaw has a red star. Nothing else in Poland does, I think. That red star means it's worth 6 instead of 3, which I don't think is reflected here. It is not. But it might have been the points that are necessary to get all the Polish provinces, which aren't listed or anything under Poland at that point. So there's 1, 2, I don't think this is. I don't know what the fuck this is. This is an unnamed province. What do we got here? We got White Russia, which cuts to here. Although, wait, there's like a little gap here for some reason. There's like this territory here. Oh, no, that's Polesia. That's part of Polesia. Okay. It's hard to find these little red borders there. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, which should put it at like, if we included Warsaw in there, 24, 7, not 18.6. I don't know what to do. Anyway, whatever. Thuringia, which I've been avoiding, is in my pile of French stuff, which means it was conquered. Baden, which was a French minor ally, got conquered, but it got absorbed somehow. Those can happen because those were minor powers. I just thought I had left Thuringia unconnected, but that's okay. I found its counter in there. Not all minors that are minors have counters, which is another problem in this game. Anyway, I don't remember what I just counted. It was a lot. It was like 21.6, something like that. Here we got something, again, really weird, but I think this has to do with the potential 1915 or 1815 scenario. This guy is around from 12 to 14, which may mean that, like, he dies before 1815 if there is such a scenario. I don't know. I'm just, again, so fucking frustrated trying to figure this shit out. This is part of what's wrong with the economic phases. I have to figure this shit out. So much shit, right? Like, most games, yeah, I mean, I'm repeating the same problems, I'm sure. I know I am in a lot of cases. But in most games, I repeat those problems, I run into the same problems again and again, but I've got my solution kind of solidified. Here I'm just like, first, there's just so many that even ones that I'm familiar with piss me off again maybe I have to make a decision on again. Just because there's just so much that's broken. Like, nearly everywhere you look in this rule book, there's something that's like, yeah, that's not clear. You know, what the hell? But beyond that, even if you clarified all that shit, you still got a game that doesn't work underneath it. And I finished the French economic stage, fatiguing enough that I don't want to go on to the British at this point. They had almost nothing to build. So, with all that money, they slapped down 5 fleets and a Corsair squadron or whatever. I don't know what Corsairs are called. They can't be used as fleets. They can only be used in the Corsair box. And their numbers are kind of weird. Like, their combat value is their evasion, which feels more like maneuver and all kind of weird shit like that, that I don't really understand the point to it, but whatever. But there are our polls. Cheating. But we're cheating in lots of stuff in this. Like, there's lots of places where I see the rules and I'm like, this is definitely not what they meant. They do not mean that I can make East Galicia part of Poland, but I'm just like, fuck it. It's too late now. Other thing. The English are holding this Mollet card. I'm not sure. This is problematic. If Napoleon is outside France, he's deployed immediately to Paris and a new leader is appointed in his place. By the rules of the game, now this is a one-time thing and it can cause big problems, and hey, maybe that's fine. I have Joseph. But Napoleon's an 18-point commander. There is the possibility, it's not the case here, but there is the possibility that there could be an 18-point army that immediately has its stacking restrictions violated and has to lose a couple of steps. And, you know, that would be putting Joseph in charge. Napoleon would be able to be supplanted by somebody in his own army, maybe even in his own hex, which might help things. But there's no one else who can take over an 18-point army, period, the end. Maybe you'd be able to rectify your stacking or something. But otherwise, when you're in violation of stacking, I believe that it immediately destroys units. It would make a little bit more sense if it forced them to spew out. And I'm going to check that to make sure that that's not the case. This is not going to affect anything here, because I do have Joseph available, and that army's only at 16 steps right now. That's a pretty strict interpretation of stacking. Unfortunately, the rules are, of course, vague. There is nothing that tells you what happens when forces are overstacked, except for one thing, which is this, which is not clear. These rules are not cumulative. Which ones? Everything up until here, whatever. But there's something here. It might be having to do with something else, what follows this, which is if an army stops, the detachment must be absorbed, the movement points, the steps have to be incorporated into the army. If there's not enough room, or if the player does not want or cannot spend the required movement points, the excess steps are eliminated. Okay. That's the only place where it talks about eliminating units due to overstacking. And what's not clear, these rules are not cumulative. It does have a semicolon, which tends to lead me to believe that it has to do with this, which is the movement rules. However, if this was not a semicolon here, if this was a separate paragraph, I would feel like it has to do with the overall stacking rules. The overall stacking rules give you no rectification for if you happen to end up overstacked. And as we can see, that card, or a leader loss check, or a redeployment of leaders or something like that, can conceivably cause you to get into a situation where you cannot actually, where you're in violation of stacking. And I feel like with no rectification, no statement that units retreat or anything like that, about the only answer is, yeah, they're overstacked, they're dead. You're going to have to eliminate some steps, which I don't know if that's what's intended or not. That's how I've been playing it. That's how I've been reading it. And now I see where a card might cause that. I'm not terribly disturbed by a one-use card causing me to lose a few steps in a weird sort of situation. But I'm kind of bothered that armies will just disintegrate if the leadership's not there for them. Like, again, this whole system of stacking and movement is just so weird, so innovative, and poorly expressed that, like, I'm left with these guesstimates. Midday on Tuesday. Initially, and this is the thing, I had thoughts about going out, right? You know, heady plans, whatever. But then I went down, I checked my cart, and I'm thinking I'll do a transfer of wheels on the carts that I have right now, or use the wheels that I have, the repaired, the brand new wheels that I have. One of the things I thought about doing, first I thought about going to Goodwill, but that's a long fucking walk, and the closest one is that I kind of want to go to is indeed about a 2-hour walk, and I'm just like, yeah, I don't care. But then there's a hardware store near me, or closer, probably about a 40-minute walk. The closest hardware store to me, believe it or not, where there are things I might need there, but by looking at my carts, I'm not sure I needed them, or I don't think I need them. So I'm thinking, I don't know, because I had ordered some Cotter's pins. What I don't have is extra caps for the end of the cart, but I don't know that that's going to be something I can get, and I'm having trouble finding them online, the ones that I the kind that I need. So I don't know what to do. And then I thought about more yard work type stuff, because it's a cooler day today. Well, tomorrow's supposed to be a cooler day, which is an appealing thing towards the Goodwill type thing. And then, I'm hungry, I make myself an omelet, and I make myself coffee, and that kind of throws the whole day into, yeah, I probably should just stay home. But what that means is I will push through the English economic phase. This is why these videos are so long. I mutter and mumbleth my way through things. This is the hardest, probably. It's hard to tell. The French were tough too. I was thinking about it, again on the cards. There's a few cards that are useful in very, very specific small circumstances. There's a bunch of cards that are just, might as well just take them out of the deck by the time they get into somebody's hands. But things like, I don't know who has it. The Art of War that the Austrians have here. That's going to be useful to everyone, but, it's a powerful card. But remembering that exists in someone's hands is kind of tough. And because it's not player turns, Empires at Arms EU use player turns, and don't have cards. Because it's not player turns, I'm not focusing on one player at a time. So I'm kind of focusing on these coalition blocks, and there might be a lot of different people to be affected by any given turn or whatever. And it's really hard to keep in mind what cards are where. It's not like there's just a couple of cards per player, In some cases, that's true. The Austrians have 3 cards. The French have a third of a deck, Put where I'm at. I just did the major powers, and I should be at 89 total income for the English. I'm trying to work this out, I've got a 30% decrease, though. Fuck, I can only pay attention to that. No, I've got to pay attention to the economics only. So that is actually 42 minus 1, 41. I should just keep track of the economic part of it. Okay, the trade part. But I just saw something that throws everything into question. Remember what I said, the continental system being in effect impacts who gets the money for it? When I initially played it, it was whoever's got continental system with France pays their bonus to the French. And I think they don't get a bonus. I think just the French get one, if I recall correctly. The trade only goes to France. Whereas with the British, if something's not in the continental system, the Brits get the money and the country receiving gets the money. In Empires in Arms, it's just, France's continental system just hurts everyone. Okay. I don't know how much France gained from it, but certainly I don't think they gained as much as Britain would off of trade because of blockades and whatnot. But anyway, outside of any historical aspect of it, the victory conditions are that the continental system is in effect for 2 years, right? That, if we take a quick look, and now the Banania rules do not work the way I'm going to describe, but the French automatic victory is they have to have Flanders, Holland, Hansa, Geneva, Newfoundland, Piedmont, Genoa, Tuscany, and the Papacy. This is really easy to get. Historically, France starts with most of this, right? So, then all the, under those rules that I used for the 1792 scenario, actually, continental system didn't exist then, so I didn't worry about it. But under the rules that I thought I was going to use, the continental system just has to be in effect for 2 consecutive winter phases. As long as anything is not allied, is allied with France, including France, I guess, but that's not clear, that would create the continental system for that. Now, the Banania rules had something different. Now, if that's the case, France would have won the game, the campaign game, in the historical terms, in like 1807, 1808. Maybe that's the argument for why Spain switches over, although there's all these Dos del Mayo cards and everything, and Spanish instability and all that shit. But fair enough. France would have historically won this game because the 1805 and 1806 winters would have included the continental system with Spain as part of it at the very least, and that would trigger the automatic victory, so the game would have been, the game as history would have been over at the end of 1806. Okay, fair enough. So the Banania rules are that you basically have to have all of Europe included. That makes more sense, but the same terms establishing the continental system, they're used in a number of places, essentially. One, as a mandatory peace condition, which says maybe Spain isn't really part of the continental system, but they're just not trading with England or something along those lines. Or, whatever. Anyway, the way the Badania rules take it, the establishment. So what are the different places it shows up in? It shows up in the peace treaty conditions, which is why I say maybe Spain's not part of it. It shows up in the in this victory condition, which kind of like says, well, if Spain just being at war with France were enough, wow, or with England would be enough, wow, France would win historically in that condition. And then the third place is that the French get the income from the countries. Well, and maybe I brought this up before, but we have some little CSs here. Spain in the 1805 scenario has a CS. Actually has it over here in the 1798 scenario as well, prior to when the continental system was, I think, established. These points go to France if the continental system is established in that country. They don't know what that means. That's true for anything. It should just be up here, but it's specified as far as I can see in the countries that are problematic. In the 1798-1805, Spain and England are at war. Over here, in 1809, Russia and Prussia have been put under the mandatory peace conditions where they were forced under the continental system. Very oddly, here we've got France under the comms. I don't know what that's meant to be. And here we have France under the comms in Prussia and Spain. This chart doesn't really make sense. The CSs don't indicate the continental system, but maybe these are because in 1813 Prussia hadn't yet gone back to war with France. I didn't know that Spain, they've got Spanish War of Liberation. I think this is a case where the Spanish government is somehow, this is the Joseph Bonaparte taking over Spain, but that's not actually even how it works. But anyhow, the indications on this seem to say the continental system's in place if any nation is there, and then at least to some extent should be giving money to the French. And oh God, because the same terminology is used through the three different things. I don't want to make it different for the different things, but this seems to indicate that if any one power is part of the continental system, it's established, which means it doesn't just give its money to it doesn't just not give money to England for trade and to itself, but also gives the money to France. Maybe these somehow feel like maybe there's something more mandatory. I don't know what the Prussia and Russia is. In case of Russia, you're talking about the Treaty of Tilsit, which does not enforce any peace conditions on Russia. Therefore, they wouldn't be part of the continental system. Good God. Again, everything is just, it's like looking at a shattered pieces of like the game at different points in development that got swept together and put, in a puzzle box together or something. It's just so fucking stupid. Anyway, the Bonania rules obviously don't work that way. And maybe they reconciled everything somewhere in Consim World threads, because again, there's no fucking errata anywhere. There's none. There's not like something that I could get that I could correct this shit with, right? There's just a rules rewrite done by fans, which conceivably, if it got rid of these stupid fucking cards and rewrote all the systems, might be a workable game. But if they kept almost anything out of the original, including components, it's much more questionable. And then the other side of it is the Banania rules, which were intended to be some sort of compilation of all these, all the stuff that I guess kind of came up, questions answered and stuff like that, that I just don't see. I don't see a way of resolving. I mean, I haven't played either one of these sets of rules. I can't guarantee that they don't work. But man, they sure don't seem like they could. Anyway. $41 in trade. As I work my way through, that's what the majors are. Now I have to go through the list of all the minors and see what's shifted and what hasn't. And remember how I have to dig through all these counters to figure out who's got the minors? I got to do that again, but this time it's got to be all of them. Like before, for example, if I'm doing France, I worry about what France has piled up in its various things. Here I have to understand all of them. 41 takes a 30% discount, which is basically 12. So that means that, and it is that 41, or it's close, you know. So yeah, all that work, and I lost $1. But 12 off that gets me down to 29, which means 77 is the amount of income the English get, which if we pretend these say plus 40 instead of plus 10 on them, again, a necessary thing. Absolutely necessary. I don't know what the plus 10 is for. There's no limitation on how much money you can have. Means that I can use the counter for that. And then all I have to deal with is that England has 6 and 2. The Brits only had enough cash to build 4 fleets of their own, but they built a Swedish and a Danish fleet as well. So they're keeping an advantage on the French builds, at least. I could have built some dummies, but saving money seems more valuable. I don't feel too convinced by dummy fleets. Yeah, you might be able to sneak a blockade and make it look stronger than it is. But I just don't know. They're like, I don't remember if they're $5 or 2. If they're only 2, it's probably worth it. They're $5 each, the same as the Corsairs are. That seems a little hefty when, at least for Britain, who can save all their cash each turn, that extra money is going to be useful. And I actually had Austria throw a bunch of money over to the Russians. Now it's time to do diplomacy. And all I want to do is go cry at this point. Like, I absolutely do not want to play this anymore, but I also kind of just don't want to do anything valuable either. I don't know why. It highlights the conundrum I face, though, with the daily, you know, the pressure to do something of value, right? It takes me a significant amount of time to get up the courage, energy, whatever it is, to go out and face the world. It's not like, oh God, it's going to be so terrible or anything, but I know I'll chafe. I know I don't want to deal. I don't, you know, whereas the decision to just blow off something, I haven't given up on either the cart, fixing that, or, you know, doing more yard work. I may do one of those things. But it took almost no time to come to the decision that, all right, I'm not going to do it today, you know, about like going out and doing shit. The other things Yeah, there's a good chance I'll end up doing them. I just don't want to right at this moment. But it is getting kind of warm. It's not hot. It's like going to get into the mid 80s. I can definitely do yard work even in that. I could go for the walk in that, whatever. It's just, it's another disinclination. And now I'm going to go do something that I find highly addictive, playing a stupid story computer game that, like, I don't get to make many choices in, but it's interesting to watch it unfold. And it's far more addictive than reading is for me, which is a very similar kind of thing. Or sit and watch videos and, an hour-long video or whatever, that's a big hunk of time that goes by, right? In the same sort of way. But I'm often finding myself, looking and I'm like, where did the day go? I'm like, yeah, I fucking jacked off all day, basically. See, looking at the cards that I have around the table that are already played out, there was an inflation card on Britain, so they have less money available to them. And it's okay. They're not going to conquer a lot of territory this turn. And they can always just dump units in if need be. Okay. Life. We're about to get into diplomacy, and that's going to be complex. But life was complex too, or better, more effective than I expected. First of all, you can't see it now, but I did the hard part of my hill. I've been holding off on that, and I got pretty much everything done there. Put a pair of work boots on instead of whatever, like sneakers or whatever I normally wear. I don't know what the hell they are. And so that protected me a little bit more from the thorns. Also had the bonus of a lot of my blackberries that I am not killing off as much, that aren't on that hill. Although I cut a lot of those down, but because I don't want too many anywhere. We're at peak. And so I collected up a nice bowl of those, and I had found some whipped cream in the trash, like after one of the parties. It's the only thing I've found in the last couple of weeks. Speaking of parties, there was one going on again out back, across in the park, and I don't know. I wander out there like, I don't like the music and whatever that's going on. It's high school kids, I think, or maybe older, I don't know. I suspect it's high school kids who don't have a place, to live and hang out and whatnot on their own. The one time I went, it seemed to be, but, somebody got a ride there, whatever. And it's just not, I'm lonely enough that I would go and hang out if it was at all, cool music or something and dance and whatever. But yeah, it was just C-rap. Some kind of EDM kind of mixture in some of it. So I don't know. But also I took care of everything that I could, I think, regarding the inheritance stuff. And that's important because, like, I ignored my wife's inheritance stuff. I can't ignore my dad's. That's way too much money. He worked until he died, basically. And, yeah, so, there are a couple of accounts, and there's like more money than I've saved up. So now I was already counting on the money I saved up being enough to last me my life. But as far as I can tell, even splitting it with my brother, there's more than I should need, which is very cool because I was a little worried. That means he's got more than he should. Well, I don't know if he's got more than he should need, but in terms of like funding the house if he wants to stay there or whatever. Anyhow, as I said, I've got to do the. I also sat out and had a beer and a cigar, which meant I took a nap. I'm going to take naps anyway, but we're on the diplomacy phase, and I've got the big question at this point because Austria and Spain, do they want to come in now? Or do they wait for Russia to just fall? And it feels like the waiting for Russia to fall is a really bad idea. But so the weird thing is, we got to worry about what the victory conditions are. Assuming no one's going to make the automatic victory conditions, then there's 17 key hexes and 12 victory hexes. And I think they're all worth a point. Paris itself is worth 3. These are coming in across the board. Economical reform, I don't know what the fuck that is. I'm assuming it's a card, but the Spanish War of Liberation, I don't think that's going to happen. France would have to do something stupid for it to happen. The Ottoman Empire, if it's still at the end of the game, is worth 3, but I think kind of the cool thing is that it generates points per turn. And whoever has the most fleets. Kind of oddly worded. Major power with more fleets on map, off map, and foreign war boxes. More than what? I'm assuming more than anyone else, but whatever. And that's it. That's all we've got. That and the alliance breaks that a couple of people have picked up. What does this all mean? I mean, obviously you want to grab what you can, but I feel like to get a good idea of what the fuck's going on, I'm going to have to count how many victory points people have. Now, we can do that by looking over these and seeing who owns what. That's kind of the key thing. There are a couple extra points, like, you know, the English are going to get 1 from this. Losing territory is bad. And other than that, you know, Paris, whoever conquers Paris, if France falls on the last turn of the game, or doesn't fall, but if somebody is holding Paris, is worth something. This is this odd thing, you know? I mean, it's like whoever technically was able to sit in Paris on that turn, with the mostest force, I guess, ends up getting a big slew of victory points if the coalition can break them there. So that's the two things. One is, can France be beaten? Well, not defeated, but essentially be invaded in trouble in 1814 at the end. And if so, who's going to be sitting in Paris? Well, it's probably not Spain. It's probably not England. They just don't have the force pools for it. So we're looking at like Austria or Russia probably, maybe Prussia, if things are lucky. But it becomes kind of a crapshoot, and one that probably doesn't mean much in terms of the eventual peace, right? Why is Paris so important? I don't know. Why are a lot of things the case in this game? But yeah, I think I'm going to evaluate the victory points and try to come up with the arguments for who wants to come in for what reason. Now, there's a very strong reason why I would say Spain, and even more so Austria, want to go to war with France right now, which is kind of at least we got Russia on our side, because if Russia falls before Prussia does, before Prussia can come back in, and Prussia can come back in, I don't remember when, summer? Yeah. Summer of 13. Okay. Yeah, I've got a 2 in there. Anyway, until summer of 13. Basically, if France can defeat Russia, swing around, defeat Austria, then they can swing around, defeat Prussia, and it might just be a situation where France is unstoppable because they're picking one off at a time. So I think Austria is forced to go in. But the big question is Spain. Now, beating France before, Chris, you don't get to exile Napoleon, and there's no rules for that like there are in every other fucking game on the subject. Being able to beat France might have some nice implications in that the full coalition can be available in 14 or whatever, if needed. But yeah. All right. So let me evaluate everybody's points. Interestingly, Paris shows up here as one of the red star hexes, as well as there. So I think it's actually worth 4 points, not 3. I'm just going to use markers to count. You know, I'm pretty sure I have enough dice to count for everyone. Note here. I don't know what this means. These points are supposed to only count in the 1805, 1809, and 1813 campaign scenarios. But here, Antwerp is only in the 1805 to 1815 scenarios. Now, there's only one scenario of that type, and it would feel kind of funny that Antwerp's of no importance if you start later than 1805. Why? I don't understand that, which is the only way that I can justify this difference between these and Antwerp itself. But for whatever reason, Antwerp becomes not important if you start at a later date. Maybe because France gets such a jump in 1805 historically, and that, like, I didn't hear, but I don't know. The matter is, if France will win if, I mean, we can see the points that are generating right now. Britain has 1 for London. France has collected 7 so far. France will simply win if, like, they're left alone. But, you know, if they're able to achieve, you know, the kind of dominance that they have right now, I'm pretty damn sure of that. The weird thing then becomes, okay, so Antwerp is not a big bonus for France particularly. And then the question becomes, okay, but whoever captures it, why is it not worth anything except in the 1805 scenario? It feels like whatever the coalition's doing, it should just be doing, right? I don't know. The current distribution, 14 points. This is from just victory point cities. 14, that's including the +3 from Paris. For France, 5 for England, 4 for Russia and Austria, 1 for Spain, 2 for Prussia. Spain's kind of this, what the fuck, man? How am I going to win? You know, sure, I could grab a couple of stars, but, you know, Spain's just not in the same world as these other players. I'm not convinced they want to go to war. How's their army? Well, their army is not built, but it's pretty damn close. 1 militia and a couple of detachments left. And things are very open, which means if we could somehow get France to surrender, we could actually take stuff. Now, we're not allowed to take Bordeaux because we have to take Languedoc first, because it doesn't have a red star, right? So, like, we can't actually improve our victory point conditions because of the peace rules, which kind of fucking sucks, but whatever. We can't claim the things we necessarily want. We couldn't take Provence, which would be very helpful to getting us towards Italy. I don't know where we have claims or whatever, particularly, where there's anything we'd have more rights to take. It just feels a little shitty that, like, I would have to take Languedoc. Let's say I was taking things. I would have to take Languedoc, Dauphin, and or Berry, or sorry, Gascony here. No, can't take Gascony. That's where Bordeaux is. So I would have to take Languedoc, Dauphin, and then, like, Berry or Burgundy if I was able to take three provinces. I'm probably not going to be able to take 3 provinces, but I'm just not going to get the stuff that I'd want. So there's kind of why the hell am I fighting then? Well, in part because I can't win anyway. I mean, I've got 1 victory point. This is someplace both Empires in Arms and War and Peace do a better job of. Empires in Arms, your victory points are based on the country you are. Like, your requirements for victory points are based on which country you are. Are they all balanced? I don't think so. But there's a bidding system, which is baked into the campaign game, which ensures that you can put some balance in it. I would still say that countries like Prussia, with its very fragile military, and some of the other weakers, Turkey and Spain, probably have a hard time winning. Britain, it's hard to justify. Like, I think Britain can win by seizing North Africa. I don't think they can win by trying to prevent everyone else from winning. But maybe in a smaller number of players, they're able to do that. And it may be just a rule that's made for that for some reason. Russia, I find, is very, very powerful. France is okay. But you have to be very active as France. Russia can kind of slip into a victory in a bloodless game of EIA. War and Peace has a more problematic system. If France survives, they win the game. Like, the game ends in 1815, or if France falls twice, using the optional rules that allow the Napoleon of returning. And that second fall is almost certain to happen. They're not really likely. They're not likely to come back and restore themselves after Napoleon. But you might have your return happen just before the 1815 end and get a victory, like through a lucky shot in a Waterloo type situation or something like that. And they only have a year on that second defeat. Otherwise, the game ends after that year. So France, basically everybody's got to go hit France if Napoleon comes back, and it sets a really strict timer on people. That's fair enough. For the other nations, the number of production cities they have as a proportion of how many they started with. So if France is defeated, whoever has the greatest proportion. Well, for Spain, they have like 1 production city. And so if they capture Portugal, they have double their production. And that is probably enough to win. Things like Austria and Prussia have like 3 or 4. Nobody's got a lot of them, but it's pretty hard to capture a whole bunch of them. However, there are a fair amount of miners that have them. So like, Spain might not be that advantaged as much as I see them in terms of that. I don't know if I've ever completed a game of War and Peace. Turkey is not in that game. So yeah, I generally feel like the German territories are still more important, but I feel like Spain does have a chance because they can conquer a couple production cities in France, and if they have Portugal as well, or if they don't, they can still get like 3 times their total without too much effort. And people would have to like fuck around with them to stop them from getting a victory, because they have kind of an easy victory. I don't feel like they have an easy victory in Empires in Arms. Here, though, Spain has nothing to make up for their shitty position. There's no proportionality. I guess the thing that's there is Spain wins the War of Liberation, they get 3 extra points, which is nice, but it's still not going to make up for it. Spain looks like a really hard win. Turkey also doesn't look like that good a win. Now, I'm going to add the points from up there and expected points, which will be things like, I don't know about the economic reform. I think that's an English point. But as you can see, England's already in pretty good shape, but they don't have a big army. So they're not going to be able to improve themselves too much, except maybe through using diplomacy on French miners or something like that, because there will be no other diplomacy in this game. There's something left. What the fuck's left? Oh, no, that's Jomini. Yeah, the French have the Jomini card, and they're like, yeah, I don't need him. Don't want to put him back. It doesn't even go back in. I mean, it does no harm to play it, but fuck it. Nobody played the economic reform. I'm going to say England gets the biggest fleet. Turkey is at +2. So we're going to push Turkey up to a 4. That's not a bad number, honestly. But they don't have a lot, like, unless they can, they're in a position where they really need to fight England to get the Ottoman Empire back, and or Russia. And Russia might be an automatic victory. Yeah, it's not going to happen anymore because the Ottoman Empire isn't going to be formed. Okay, so that was Britain and Turkey's points. And Prussia is at -2. Whoops, there they go. Gone, gone, gone. No points. But they could gain some. They're in a rich area, as is Austria. And then the last point, Spain loses their point as well. This is from victory point penalties from breaking alliances. So, you know, this is kind of fair. But the big thing is defeating France. Well, what's up with that? Like I said, I think Austria kind of feels like they have to. Spain is the big if here. Does Spain want to throw itself in? I really wish Tilsit gave the, it really should give the continental system for Russia for a mandatory peace or something like that, or until, I don't know, something. Because otherwise, it really doesn't serve much purpose. Like, I need to defeat Russia to get my automatic victory or whatever. Defeating Russia just to knock them down doesn't do a lot. In Empires in Arms, there is sort of a, France wants to beat up on each person in sequence. A lot of these have that, you know. Let's beat up on Austria in the 1805 scenario. Then 1806, we beat Prussia. Beating Russia would be useful, but it's the most iffy in all of them. But Empires in Arms doesn't have a manpower. It doesn't have a force pool. It has a manpower component. It doesn't have a force pool, which means that if you don't beat up Russia, they will have a fucking humongous army. Most of it they can't field. You know, it'll be in garrisons or whatever, but they will have a fucking humongous army on the board that will be almost impossible. You know, they'll just be able to recharge their army in the midst of the game. Now, how believable is that? Yeah, I don't know. Because this isn't World War I, where Russia didn't mobilize a lot of troops. They certainly had a huge population that conceivably could have been mobilized, but you're not hitting the population limits in mobilization for most countries here. You kind of are in France. And then the other, the War and Peace does have a force pool limit. I don't feel like driving into Russia is necessarily that big an advantage there, except that France can win an automatic victory by doing that. The question is whether they'd rather delay and play the game out instead. In Empires in Arms, there is a very good reason to hit Russia, though. One is the continental system, to enforce it, and another is like expanding Poland and stuff like that. You get to take territory away from countries like you do here. You don't really get to take away as much territory permanently in War and Peace in the same sort of way. But again, in neither case, that trying to force the French into Russia, it's a really iffy thing, right? I mean, there's a reason that you're not supposed to attack Russia. Especially in the winter, but that's what I did, damn it. Yeah, I don't know what I'm learning here. I'm looking at these points and I'm like, okay, great. I processed the information and now I'm like, yes, we need to defeat France. And the big question is, does Spain want to throw their army into this? And I think the answer is yes, because they could actually be a key part of defeating France. So I think what we're going to see is Austria and Spain declare war on France. And then when this war shakes out, whatever comes of it, we shall see and have to make decisions there. Questions. Spain, I think, is going to declare war on France without joining the coalition. Austria may also wish to not join the coalition. Yeah, I think Austria also is going to declare war on France, again, without joining the coalition. And the reasons for this is that they can evaluate their position. So let's say Austria starts beating France back, Spain's marching in and taking the south, and there's a possibility that Austria and Spain, between them, could win a war, could force a defeat on France. Then they form a coalition between just themselves and split the spoils and leave Russia out of the equation. Britain's not thrilled with this, obviously. But on the other hand, they only have a vote and a half, essentially, right? Which means that Russia-Britain is a particular alliance. The other thing is here, France is not allied with Turkey, which means that Austria doesn't have to worry about the Turks, and the Turks don't really care about the Austrians. So there's like an advantage there. So I think both countries are just going to declare war as independent forces. No, game state barely changed at all. The declarations of war, obviously. Ooh, I forgot to deploy these English. Guess I ought to do that. Even though not a lot has changed in terms of game state right now, this was a huge amount of effort and time. Probably, the equivalent to doing a country, one of the big countries' economics, maybe a little less than that, or, an early counter move or whatever. So, yes, I am going to pause at this point. A couple of big factors that could induce the English, at least, to want to be part of one of these coalitions, and the English, to have either Spain or Austria as part of their coalition. In terms of Spain, I could move English forces through Spain and engage in south of France. Of course, I can do a naval invasion. France is undefended for the most part. In terms of Austria, the papacy is still an Austrian minor ally. Naples is not available to cut through that, whereas the French could cut through. If I dispatched these forces to operate somewhere else, the French could cut through the papacy and capture it because they're at war with Austria, and then operate in Naples and take that out. So that's not cool. I've got like a lack of opportunities in certain areas, but I do have the opportunity up there still with Wellington. More importantly, I got the Turks I can keep beating on. I'm fine with grabbing Middle Eastern territory. But again, In Empires in Arms, every territory you conquer is worth victory points, essentially, right? First of all, conquering shit, I believe, gives you victory points. I'm not really sure about that. Let me think about that. No. But possessing territory at the end of the game gives you manpower, which counts as victory points. Manpower is also useful in your production. War and Peace has a similar kind of system. Not everywhere on the board has production cities, but most of the miners do. And basically, it's the production cities that are of importance in terms of victory points, which means if you conquer production cities, you're able to increase your victory point total. There are some iffy questions about that, like, do production cities that you can't produce in count for anything? And maybe the newest edition answers that. It has clarified some things. It just didn't fix the main, one of the major problems with the game in terms of the final victory conditions. But I gotta say, that's a much more coherent game than this. It's like, people actually played it and figured out, yeah, this game actually kind of mostly works. Like I said, there are some real issues with, and I'll point them out when I'm playing it if they show up to my mind again, because I don't remember all of them. But there are some significant issues as to, how the campaign game itself develops and how victory works in that and everything. And there are some weird fuzzinesses too. But, and again, Empires in Arms, look, it has a huge following. There's a reason for that. It's a game that, I'm not going to say, oh, it's shown, it's a great game and perfect and all this. It's not. It's got its flaws. It's got its problems. It's got a lot of stuff that maybe the community as a whole has agreed on, some of which I may not follow. I'm not sure. Because I don't get the wooden wall strategy by England, if it's what I think it is. It does not make sense to me. I believe England's only way of winning is to conquer North Africa. And I don't think that's what the wooden wall strategy is. I think the wooden wall strategy is preventing victory, which means they're defining the victory conditions differently than I do. And yeah, I don't know. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the wooden wall strategy includes conquering North Africa. Anyway. Like I said, taking a pause. We're going to be doing 2 vids on this year. To gripe, really. I'm not going to play. I just woke up. It's 7 p.m. This is not cool. I went to bed when I normally do. Getting on 6 p.m. or 6 a.m. or whatever, and a little earlier than that. About an hour and a half later, I woke up, was up for maybe 10 or 15 minutes. I wasn't really tired when I went to bed, but I was tired enough. Anyway, and of course physical pains and all that. Went back to sleep. So we're talking, close to 13 hours of sleep or whatever. Absolutely not what I was counting on. I've been taking naps most days, right? And I was counting on being awake at like midday or so, or maybe a little later. And there were things I wanted to do today. This kind of blows my whole week because it's already Wednesday. It doesn't blow what already happened, but it blows the rest of the week. It's already Wednesday. I can't fuck around with my sleeping schedule too much. What I've got to do is I've got to get it prepped for Friday. I've got one more day to do that. And I got to make sure that I don't sleep the entirety of the day, but I can't do anything tricky like, trying to force myself to be awake during most of the day on Thursday. And yeah. And this is the kind of thing that's why, I can't get anything done, because shit like this just throws itself in. And this was for no reason. Normally, I violate myself by, staying up for too long or something like that. I don't think I did that. Although I may not have had a nap. That might have been the thing. I think I was planning on, but I don't think I had a nap. And I did the yard work and everything, fatiguing my body more. But I really wasn't expecting to get hit with this many hours of sleep. The person who I think is watching this the most intently, there aren't a lot of you left, and I understand that. Trust me. I want to get through the playthrough. I'm not someone who likes to bail out, and I'm getting pretty close to the end. Brought up an interesting question. It was kind of look, we've been craving a hex encounter equivalent to Whiff, World in Flames. Strangely enough, the same designer who did World in Flames also did the first edition of Empires in Arms, but then couldn't support both games, so he sold Empires in Arms off, and then it never got the same amount of attention that Whiff has from, what is it, ADG or something, Australian Design Group. I get it confused because there's also Amarillo Design Bureau, which is the SFB people. Anyway, the thing that I argue is that these hexes here and in War and Peace, which is just a significantly better game, are the wrong scale. In Whiff, you can get away with a hex encounter scale of this magnitude because the fronts were largely contiguous and the size of the armies involved, etc., was just so great that the idea of being able to use zones of control and all that all kind of works for it. Also, the stacking limitations per hex works, so you don't get a pile up of all of the entire army in one hex. It wouldn't fit, But Napoleonic era is still close enough to earlier periods. Yes, the armies have gotten much, much bigger over the course of the last century in the Napoleonic era. But it really isn't until you hit World War I, with a few exceptions. There are theater exceptions where you saw contiguous fronts and stuff like that. But it really isn't, and you also see it at an earlier period where fortifications are of more importance, where in a sense that becomes the barrier. When you go back to the Age of Marlborough, for example, you're looking at a contiguous front line. It's just there aren't a lot of troops on it, But here, you're looking at a situation where smaller fortifications fall relatively easily. Even the larger ones are not that hard to take. And quite simply, the level of abstraction on the hex board is about the same as the level of abstraction that exists in the Empires in Arms area-based game. Yeah, each area is, approximately the size of the areas here. So there is some more detail on the hexes. but they're not providing a detail that's useful. And what I would argue is the detail that's useful in this is really the detail that the Zucker Napoleonic operational games have. That's about the level you need to be able to delve into the actual movements in a way that adds any information, adds any real story to the game. So instead, what you see here is very gamey operational type details. Things like, trying to maneuver units behind other units to prevent their retreat so that they have to take greater losses and whatnot. And yes, to some extent that applies. But not really. It's not believable, right? If I send a force that could be overrun behind the enemy, and I don't know if you're allowed to overrun on retreats. That would be that would be a fix to some of it. But no matter what, right? An army is 16. Is going to be 16 strength points. If I send small 4-point forces around to make the exit more difficult, I'm not actually representing what would likely happen in a rout of that nature. Cutting supplies in that way doesn't really do what this game represents properly. And having those small forces sitting out there doesn't really work. What it comes down to is winning the big battle. If those small forces trying to cut supply or whatever are there, they can be beaten the shit out of. The lack of supply isn't going to stop that from happening. So there's no way you can kind of surround a force and cut it off and force it to retreat or anything like that in the ways that you kind of can in the Zucker games. What you end up with instead is this kind of trying to set pieces up so that they can jump into place, and if you win the major battle, then you end up getting the advantage. You could also conceivably cut supplies, etc., in that sort of way. It's tricky and it's hard to do, and it's not particularly fun to try to set up. And what it really ends up coming down to is you just end up battering your two big armies together, and it feels exactly the same as Empires and Arms. Are there some opportunities? Yeah, a couple, but they don't feel realistic at all. And it's because the scale of the game is wrong. You're not going to position, basically, and then also the way the movement and combat works, which means that, yeah, maybe I can throw a bunch of forces around you, but you don't have an opportunity to react and try to get out of that net closing if it can be set up. It either can be set up or it can't. And if it can be set up, because this has very much of an I go, you go formulation, even though it's using the chip pull, it's just a matter of, did I get lucky with the chits? Can I move those smaller forces into play with lesser leaders or whatever? And the chances are, yes, you can, because almost everything operates. Yeah, you have enough 3-point leaders that you can set anything up that way. So the real question becomes, do you want to break off small units, force march them to try to cut supply, and maybe get some kind of advantage out of that? That's something I haven't really been doing much of. But the way it works out doesn't feel realistic at all. So yeah, that's kind of the problem, is that what this game represents, it gives you a nice geometrical puzzle, the way that Afrika Korps does, in terms of like cutting supplies and stuff like that. It doesn't give you something that feels at all Napoleonic in terms of the actual machinations, not the word I was looking for, but that you're trying to go through to enable it. It just doesn't. And so that's another disincentive to playing that way, is that it feels like such bullshit. Another point, which is, hey, we're looking for something and there's nothing out there and we're willing to mod it and whatever. This isn't the game to do that with. Go back to War and Peace, a game with a lot less problems. Mod on stuff to War and Peace to make it more closer to what you're looking for. It doesn't have a component problem like these cards that you would have to design a new deck of cards to make the game work. It has more familiar stacking and attrition that is more applicable to the actuality, where large forces are penalized for staying together as large forces. This game doesn't do that. Not at all. You can basically have, what is it? You know, a 50 strength point force, for the French especially, but say a 48 strength point force with most alliances without any real penalty to doing that. It still moves quickly. As far as I can tell, you could charge the army group 2 extra movement points for just existing, in which case, yes, it's slower. But it never suffers attrition as long as it stays within its movement allowance. And there's nothing that requires you to spread your armies out. There's rules for sucking the army back together, but there's no real reason for spreading it apart. There's nothing in the game that requires, incentivizes anything like historical behavior on the armies. And some of that has to do with the fact that the hexes are too fucking big. The armies could operate across a hex the size of this, all stacked in one place. So in that sense, it's kind of realistic. One of the problems with War and Peace is that the attrition levels are too high because it's trying to force the armies to spread out more. This game isn't doing that. But the operational hex size that the Zucker game uses allows you to spread out to the level that is appropriate, right? The stacking limitations, et cetera, in that, they work, they're right. The supply and attrition, it's right. When you get to this level, there's no way of representing it that works because the hexes are big enough to hold the entirety, essentially, of a nation's force. They really are. It's not World War II level size armies. It's the 19th century. You don't have the railways and whatnot, but you also don't have the mobilization levels that are the same as ended up in the 20th century. And yeah, it's just, you also don't have the movement capabilities, which allow for the frontage to be covered in the same sort of way. It's just, there's so much that doesn't work in the hex grid at this level. But once you blow it down to a lower level, and it would take a much, much larger game to do that, you start to get a system that just works better. And that's the game we want. We don't want, like, I don't know about we want, but that's the game that would be required to give the level of detail that's desirable and still maintain some reality, is something more like the Diffraction Entertainment stuff, right? Those massive games. Something like that would actually help, where you're taking something along the scales of the Zucker operational games and just gluing them together to create a Europe that's big enough. And that's a lot. That's a hell of a lot to do for what's really the framework of a Napoleonic grand diplomacy, grand strategy type game. And that's why Empires in Arms works, where in a way that and caught attention in a way that this and honestly War and Peace didn't, although War and Peace had its run, right? I mean, it's an older game. I had something else I wanted to babble about. Oh yeah. This is weird. It's sort of my gripe about the whole thing is that honestly, World in Flames is not the optimal, right? Because World in Flames especially, although it's the one that caught the attention, right? It is not at the same level across all theaters and all types of warfare in a very disturbing sort of way. It feels like it tries to go into more detail in a lot of things, but it feels like the naval system in particular is a little too abstracted. The air system is probably about right, more detailed than the more detailed than the naval system, and about as detailed as the land system. More detailed than the naval, about as detailed as the land. I feel like there's a lot more consistency when you look at A World at War and its predecessors. Where the fuck are they? Oh, there they are. Advanced Third Reich and Empire of the Rising Sun. I feel like they do a better job, but WIF was the one that caught on. And to be fair, WIF came out earlier than the Advanced Third Reich stuff. The old rise and decline of the Third Reich was not, it was not enough detail. But the core of the old Third Reich is in that A World at War. And what it means is that all the systems are much, much closer. Whereas WIF ends up abstracting certain parts of stuff, but going into too much detail in others. I know that detail is appealing. That's fine. Specific types of planes and this, that, and the other. It's all pretty and wonderful and everything. If you look at the earlier versions of WIF, they're basically focused on taking that gestalt view of everything and then let's go into a lot of detail on the land stuff. And then they slowly started patching in more details on everything else. For the Third Reich family, A World at War was basically brought into being by bringing in new elements at that same level of abstraction. So the level of abstraction for the air and naval game in the original Third Reich was a greater level of abstraction than it was in the land system, by a little bit. And Advanced Third Reich, etc., especially Rising Sun, added more detail into the naval system, which wasn't applied to Advanced Third Reich. But it also added new subsystems at the same sort of level of abstraction that everything kind of was at. So A World at War, when it comes, when you come to the whole thing, is more abstract than WIF, or than WIF's most detailed stuff. But that level of abstraction is kind of the same across the board, which I like a great deal more. I understand the desire for what World in Flames does, but what World in Flames does is really kind of a patchwork, comparatively. When you look especially at like the technology research, the diplomacy, all that. The Third Reich family does a much, much better job of maintaining everything across the board, whereas World in Flames focuses so heavily, first on the land combat, then on the air combat. They started making that more detailed, although it's still abstracted as hell. And that's kind of where I see the problem with the World in Flames view. But it's the most popular, so let it be, you know. The fact that the designer of A World at War chose not to have a developer and to rely on his fan base to basically continue the development of the game and to help in directions and stuff. I feel like that had good results overall in terms of the overall design of the game. What it really didn't do was make the rule book comprehensible, which is really the biggest problem. The rule book for A World at War needs fresh eyes on it regularly, and it needs to be rewritten with that view to it. Because what you really have is a game that's, you know, designed by that the rules especially are heavily influenced by the fan base. This is really going in weird places, but I just want to have that kind of dialogue as much as I can. You know, I try to have it on the YouTube comments, and it works fine there. But that's reaching to one person. And I feel like maybe this information is of value to the few others of you that are still watching these and staying awake for it. Big question that remains as I start to, you know, I set up the pool and whatnot, is do the English want to play this? It doesn't do a hell of a lot. The Russian army is back here. It's not really in contact with the French. I think I'm going to hold off on playing the Millet card. I may actually turn face up cards like I did here that I'm likely to want to play, simply as a reminder of what is out there and what could be in play. The reason it's not that big a deal is if France is not engaging the Russians this turn, it just throws Napoleon back to Paris, puts a bad leader in his place. He's got a good leader with him who can take command of the army group, and puts us into a position where, yeah, if there's a fight this turn, it will weaken the French army. But next turn, there's a full redeployment of leaders. I can pull Napoleon back to where he wants to go. So it doesn't look like it's terribly valuable at this moment. All right. I don't know what I'm going to do with the cards. Yeah, I mean, there's a small number that are useful, and most of them are just dead weight in the hands. I have such a horde of cards, a lot of them are potentially useful, and it's really hard to make that decision as to whether or not I want to play them at any given time. Look at the Turks, though. This forage card. Immediately remove one enemy cavalry step. That seems to imply that I am able to paw through the enemy's forces to determine where there's a cav step. I don't recall. That feels wrong in some ways. I don't remember there being an intelligence rule one way or the other. I've kind of played it as like I would in most games of this kind that don't say anything about that. Yeah, you know, I can see what's face up on the board. Maybe I can ask how big a force is or something, but I don't feel like I should be able to understand the full extent of the enemy's forces. Maybe I'm supposed to. Oops. I pull a big Empire Movement 4. Not everything can move on this. Also, it is spring. Takes a fair amount of winter quarters. I feel like the sort of summer attitude of delay stuff as much as possible is in place. The Empire 4, again, it's not a chit that I have to move anything for, and I really don't see anything I want to reposition or really feel an advantage towards moving right away. I would rather see the enemy operate before I make any decisions. Brings a question that I had in mind, which was whether I just wanted to load up the economics phase thing, because I had sort of a personal, well, not a personal, but a game-related rant, not all that, that diverged from this game quite significantly into the, eventually into the WIF and World at War comparison. I feel like I have to get the spring turn out of the way. But yeah, I just, again, just don't feel the desire to play this. And although I'm feeling anxious and want to do other things, there's nothing to do. It's late night. And so I will just go amuse myself. I've been watching videos and whatnot. But I did the big thought of, I pulled a chit and realized that, yeah, I don't really want to move anything. A little more exciting, a Coalition 3. The Russians moved the one force that maybe they shouldn't, which is the Kutuzov force. That opens things up. The Turks can just come in, you know, sort of. I mean, there are a couple of smaller Turkish, Russian forces in the way, but that could actually end up being giving up the game. But it's kind of a, get the fuck out of my way, France. You know. Elsewhere, other powers saw it as more of an opportunity. The Austrians swung through, cut the French supply source there. I'm not even sure if the French are in supply. I think they are, because they make it to Magdeburg, Wittenberg. It gets kind of hard after that, though. 1, 2, 3, 4, that's another fortress. They're basically relying, so my worry was that they were relying on that depot to get them into Prussia. That doesn't seem to be the case. And then they have supply out of Poland, which is what they're actually operating off of for the most part. So I actually think everything is okie dokie for them. Prussia doesn't have a desert in the middle of it the way Austria does, which works fine for Austria itself, but for people trying to transit Austria as either allies or conquerors, it's problematic because it does require an extra piece. But anyway, yeah, the Austrians cut that supply and gathered, I guess, the army of Bohemia up here. There's not much for the French to face the Austrians with. They've got the Spanish army, which is no longer, it's under Massena now, here in Hanover. But that's really going to have to go down and deal with Spain because, boy, the Spanish are coming through and they're trying to force a French surrender. And will they manage it? No, the Spanish army will get down there and be able to prevent that. But there is really a danger here across the board in a lot of different ways. I think the French are going to have to pull out of Russia. The problem with all that is I was kind of planning on playing Scorched Earth to make the French in more trouble in Russia, but it's not obvious to Austria that the French are going to run back. All those attrition checks would be painful for the French army. It's a very powerful card. One that, you know, if it ends up in French hands, probably doesn't ever get played again. It's just because you don't want it coming up again and again in enemy hands, hitting you when, well, first of all, its specifics. I mean, I think you can use it against the national force, but every enemy force located in one of these areas of the player's choice immediately undergoes attrition. Spain, Portugal, Russia, Africa, Asia. Don't know if Asia is defined. I'm guessing it's basically anything running down here. But anyway, the point is, yeah, France could use it to decimate the Russian army before an invasion, but then it goes back in the deck, and you don't want it hitting you. Your attrition checks are going to be a lot worse than the Russian ones there. Presuming that the modifiers work the way that I think they do, which is things like, I didn't move when I had to take this check, therefore it doesn't hurt me. Yeah. We took out a couple of units that the French had stranded behind, as well as that depot. We captured Ratisbon and Ulm. There's really not much that can oppose us, even though there's a fair amount of counters down there. You know, I think what just happens is the French withdraw, and then the French army goes in and tries to smash Austria again. But it's so far into Russia. It's not that far in, but it's in Russia. It's so far away from Austria itself that it's going to be kind of problematic. And then I also have to worry about a backdoor attack by the Russians, because now I have a possession here in terms of Poland that I'd really rather not lose. Yeah. You know, I came up here because of sort of the angst of like, I don't have anything to do. I tried to go to sleep, rested for an hour with a video on, got to the end of it and said, yeah, gonna get up. And, you know, I had kind of high hopes. But again, I still get no matter how high my hopes are, this sort of, yeah, but I don't want to do this. It's like there are times when it plays okay. There are other times when it just freezes up. It's kind of funny. There's sort of this, you know, I talk about there's this sort of sense of like completion and accomplishment when you get through a long game like this. It's not going to happen here. I'm just making myself miserable, but I got to do it, man. I got to do it. And we're not that far from the end. I describe things more as restlessness than angst, to be honest. Anyway, I went out at like 1:30 and walked for more than 2 hours. Went downtown. Didn't find anything too exciting. Got myself scared a couple of times. Weird noises in the woods on my way down. And yeah. Guy on a bike with a mask who kind of circled me. That's okay. But yeah, it's just like, it's so dead at this time of night, and it's just kind of crazy. I also had trouble making my way back up the hill. You know, I don't know how I manage it when I'm drunk, to be honest. Almost fell in a ditch. Anyhow, had a couple of activations coming through. Neutral land, the Prussians are the only neutrals. They don't want to do anything. There was a winter quarters. This is in reserve, ready to go back in the cup. And then an Empire naval where the French pulled a fleet from Toulon up to here, tried to do a breakout into the North Sea and got chased back. So, yeah, I guess I keep pulling. A funny thing, the Spaniards are holding this Barbary Pirates. I could have actually hit the French as they moved with that. I forgot about it. And I think I don't want to play it. I want to make sure that there's some chance that the English Navy can be beaten. I don't particularly see too much point to just, you know, spiking a French Navy. We've managed to get a second winter quarters, which means the French are kind of under pressure to play, to do some movement with the Empire Land 3 that they drew. 3 is also a good chit as opposed to the 4. It means almost everything can move. I may have some detachments like these Hessians here, but I don't think Hesse is mine. I think it's still Prussian. I don't know. Yeah, there it is. Another bit of problem. For whatever reason, I'm deciding the French are going to still go for Russia. We'll see how that works out. Letting the Austrians loose seems dangerous, but I marched up, I took Narva, okay, fine. but then hit St. Petersburg, and I noticed there's no dividing line between Finland, which is listed as being part of Sweden and actually is in the things, and Karelia. I think St. Petersburg is all that's in Karelia. I don't know where the divide should be, but I'm pretty sure Viborg was still Swedish at this point. I don't know. To split the French army up with Soult marching and capturing Minsk and moving into place here, and then Napoleon charging across to hit Vitebsk here. Now, Napoleon with the Grand Army is probably stronger than whatever this Army of Poland is built up to. Even though it has some nice toys in it, like the Guards and the Guard Cav, it's still Alexander in command, which, you know, is a 3-point differential right there. And if the French are going to split their forces up, there's some possibility that I might be able to defeat them in detail. So I tried a withdrawal, which generally is going to generate a +3 to the die roll, kind of no matter what, which means you've got better than a 50-50 chance. But the French played their flank march and prevented it. So we're going to have a major battle there. Let's take a look at the various battle cards. The French are attacking. Let's look at what they didn't do. They didn't do an ambush, which they couldn't. They didn't do Battle of Nations, which they couldn't. They didn't do Cossacks, which is an iffy chance of causing a greater pursuit. What did they do? They went with a slope and a square formation, which isn't going to matter, but they did put a leader in play, so I guess we'll roll and fail at it anyway. For the Russians, they used their 2 cards, a Vive l'Empereur, which improves our morale check, and a screen that I did not put in. I put a crap leader in for, which will not be in play, but might have helped us. Ended up +9 to +3. Everybody's throwing everything they can in this. By the way, the Russians actually outnumber the French slightly. An 18 to a 13, this will be a French victory. Pretty bad. Despite the Vive l'Empereur, the Russians are demoralized. They lost 5 steps from that, which means this army is pretty much demolished at this point. Have trouble rebuilding. And on top of that, I lost Prince Bagration. The French lost, I don't remember who. One of their 301s. I was going to take it on a 3x1, but he's a cav leader, so anyway. They have plenty of them, but they're useful, spreading them about. So, I don't know. But yeah, that puts the French in an interesting position, where if this ends early, I'm screwed, right? Like, I don't gain anything from it. But if it ends late, I could hit Smolensk, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Sorry, 1, 2, 3. I don't even have to. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I could make it to Moscow, and I could drop myself off a depot there. Yes, the Russians could force march and attempt to prevent me from being in supply or something along those lines. But yeah, I have the Boulogne camp in hand, so if I get another activation, I could just charge Napoleon forward. There's no assurances because it's a spring turn and 2 winter quarters are already done. Started moving the Army of Germany back in. That's a small army though, so I got to be careful with it. But I was thinking about the Austrian Scorched Earth card here. What's interesting is if the French had that, they could play it against Russia in Russia. I don't know what that's supposed to resolve as, you know? It's like, yeah, it wouldn't have as much effect, and I already talked about why they probably wouldn't want to, but they could play it. And I guess maybe it's the Russians decide to do scorched earth, but fuck it up completely, and the French are unaffected and the Russians are affected. Because it makes no sense that like the French would have scorched earth into the areas that Russia is still occupying, right? And of course, some of these cards, you know, what they claim to be may not be what they really are, but whatever. It's just, it's a problem I have with CDGs. This isn't, but like, it's as if the event isn't really well thought out either. No big shock. From the Turks, even though they can't get an automatic victory, hey, they wanna beat up on Russia too. Yeah. They're spread out. So this looks, you know, more like your World War II type game, right? Or something. Not necessarily every hex, but the idea of like this contiguous frontage. It's just like that because of stacking restrictions and movement. I was able to gather together for 2 movement points the main army and move it forward. It's more of a threat now. Sort of that French Central Force, including the Army of Spain, which is up here, is kind of pulling its way back to make it so that they can defend against any kind of attempt for Spain to knock France out of the war. We're in danger. The Austrians outgun us everywhere, and we're going to give up ground to them and then, you know, take it back, I guess. There's some possibility that, like on a winter turn or something, if things look bad that far in, I'm not expecting that to be happening though. I'm like, oh, I forgot about my poles. What do I fucking want to do with poles? I think they're fine where they are. I don't want to commit them closer to like Charles's army. I've got enough problems with, you know, Saxons here, but I don't know what to do. I can run away. Again, Saxony can't fall until winter. Might be best. Let's just get them the hell out of Dodge. Which feels totally weird, this idea of let's abandon our territory because we don't want to lose the army factors. And we expect to be coming back and retaking. Again, the game just does not play the way other Napoleonic games do, where minors are conquerable not in the winter phase. And in the ways it doesn't, it feels less historically accurate to me. Strangeness of my saga continues with sleeplessness or whatever. Woke up today at 5 p.m. Okay, cool. You know, but it actually isn't a bad time to be awakening on Thursday. The only thing is I got like 10 hours of sleep, which, again, I had just gotten off of like 13 or 14 the day before, so I don't know. And I end up not realizing it's Thursday still. And getting ready and heading out and making it about halfway to my dancing. And then then realizing, wait a minute, it's Thursday, isn't it? And part of me says I should ask someone or something like that. And, you know, there were people I could have asked. But no, I turned around and went home. And luckily enough, my reasoning was correct. And it was indeed Thursday. And I just didn't think about it. And then I ended up having a beer and the rest of the cigar that I was taking on my walk. Since I was going to have a beer at the end of the walk anyway, I felt like I deserved it. And then went to sleep again. Kind of snoozing for like an hour and a half or so. What the one good thing is, I found a couple of sneakers at Pre's Rock. The guy who died young, track star from this town, Prefontaine, and there was just a horde of them there today because there's like, I don't know, some kind of trials going on for some kind of games in Japan. But yeah, and now, you know, I piddled around. It's now Friday morning, probably getting close to 1, and I figure I'll get some of this in and try to get this video up if I can get through the spring turn. That's kind of my goal, to do that before I go dancing. It's supposed to get hot again on Sunday. So I drew a Coalition Land 4. A couple of units moved. Charles moved up to the front there. Wellington heading down as well. That's Prussian, not something I need to worry about. With just sort of the intention of trying to smash together and you know, create. First of all, right now, while I have 4 armies in Germany, essentially, taking territory from the French, but also getting them close enough together that they can interact, assuming Austria re-enters the British bloc. And then I drew the Empire Land 1, and it's time for me to decide, am I playing the Boulogne camp? You know, a single chit could end the turn here, which Russia will surrender, I think. They don't want to take double penalties. And there are enough French troops in Russia that it's dangerous. Polish naval move results in them seizing Toulon, and that they got a depot in there, and that gives them, and added reinforcements after taking it. That gives them an entry into Italy if they want it, or to move up against Lyon. The Peninsular Army could operate in conjunction with the Spanish army instead, if they want the extra forces. Right now I look at the armies, and the army of Spain is way back here. So I've been kind of pressing towards Lyon. Might be my best move, although it's easier for the Spaniards to supply in that direction. Which, you know, I could dispatch my depot into Marseille and work the English in that direction, which would actually be probably the best move if I'm clever enough to do that. But also the possibility of taking Italian territory is present. I could even take Mantua, which would be very valuable. And of course, gaining, if we can knock France out, England gaining territory is very useful towards their victory conditions. Remember, everyone except France is pretty close in victory conditions, with the one exception. I don't remember what the exception was. But there are countries that are going to have a hard time here meeting the total victory points. Fuck, I realize I fucked up again. It was the army of Poland that got its ass kicked. Somehow or another, I was using the second army for this. But it's the army of Poland that got smacked. I'm having such a hard time keeping track of these. I don't know what to do about this. I was kind of surprised at all the goodies the army of Poland had, but for whatever reason, I really don't know why I made the mistake here, except that, like, I've got this lack of caring about the game in so many ways. Yeah, I just don't know what to fucking do. My goal, I just drew a coalition land movement, and I shifted Russians away from the Turks. Hey, why risk them when I don't have a big army up there and I'm gonna take hits? Just give up the territory. That makes the most sense, especially if I'm gonna surrender. Well, there's the chance that this recovers, and I've got to try to fix something between the Second Army and the Army of Poland. At the very least, I can say Bagration did indeed die. and then try to rebalance forces in terms of the number of steps that were taken out. So I tried to rebalance things, whatever. But we failed twice to undemoralize. This is a big deal. We could have gone and maybe sieged this city or something, but we're not in great shape anyway. So maybe I shouldn't have made two attempts to undemoralize. Maybe I shouldn't have made any, because I can't reach the city without. There's no way I could face either of these. I could force march and try to knock this out. What does that do me? That's the big question. What do I gain? Well, I would gain the capacity. Moscow, first of all, I wouldn't have to surrender. Secondly, Moscow would be out of supply. I think it's worth it. I think it's worth force marching to try to beat the French. Now, there's two ways I could do this. I could actually force march to here and just siege this, and that would do just as much for me. And I wouldn't have to force march both armies in that case. And might cost the French a great deal in terms of supplies. I wish I could cut something further in, but the problem is there's really two different supply lines in play. So there's no central place I could hit, and it's also, where it would be a central place is back here, although Königsberg is probably sufficing as one as well, which means that I couldn't, there's just no way I can cut everything off, but I could cut two armies off. And then the question becomes, do I want to separate my army groups or take the double attrition? I don't know. We succeeded in taking Vitebsk. That cuts the supply off of both of these. Now, they don't have to make attrition checks this turn, but what's going to save them is really the question. Got the army of Germany there, but that's quite a ways back. I feel like I'm going to end up taking an attrition check, falling back onto my supply lines. And that also means Russia does not have to surrender. So, yay, I guess. One thing I could do is I could force march French units if I get another chit. And yes, I'll be taking the out of supply attrition, but I'll be taking that anyway next turn. There's no real penalty for forced marching when you're already out of supply, which again, that feels bogus to me, right? Like the only penalty is I suffer the out of supply attrition check, but I've got to take that attrition check no matter what. So it's kind of interesting. The French have absolutely no reason not to move. Could I beat up on Kutuzov on his own there? Because he's only a single army now. No, because Napoleon's too far back. More valuable, I can slice back and maybe get Napoleon in supply, and thereby once again force Russia into this choice of, do you want to surrender now or do you want to fight on and maybe surrender worse? Because it's kind of like using the doubling cube in backgammon at this point. It's like, yeah, if France keeps bashing me, I will not be able to hold on, but maybe they can't afford to, right? Especially if they're taking heavy attrition checks in Russia. And if we can hold out long enough and hit them with winter or whatever, that's going to be pretty painful. And though the final winter quarters comes up and France does not get a way out of there, we do have to make an attrition check over here with Alexander's force, and I think everything else is pretty much open. So, again, the Chit Cup does weird things, right? Like, I just don't know. I feel very strange about oh, I'm cut off out of supply, but I guess it's no stranger than, oh, I got cut off out of supply at the end of the term. It's not like I've been spending all my time out of supply, but I could have organized things so that, if the chits came out different, I could have organized things so that I could fall back. If they came out different in another way, the Russians couldn't have taken this. It's just, I just guess you put it up to some sort of hand-wavy explanation as to what the hell is going on here. You got to make it up. It's not like the game's really telling you why the chits are coming out in the way they are and what that means. Now, in tactical games, which use a chit cup a lot more frequently, I've kind of come to my peace with them, which is it's showing some of the vagaries of movement and whatnot, and getting the jump and surprise and all kind of stuff like that. And I guess you could kind of use the same here. It just, I don't know. I'm never a fan of them, but that may be as much this sort of, yeah, it's an unfamiliar system to me. It's one that I just don't buy into, and essentially, I've argued this with the with the Friedrich and Maria games, which is kind of this, yeah, it's getting rid of something and replacing it with another problem. This is a very different theory of how to approach games from stuff like the great campaigns of the American Civil War or the CWB stuff, where I'm like, yeah, what they're trying to do is improve on how the core systems kind of work. With this, it feels more like, yeah, you've traded one set of unbelievable problems for another set where I've got to kind of make shit up to accept what the hell is going on. I don't know. I really don't know. When it comes down to it, board games just don't represent war very well. They don't manage to get all the details. Okay, well, we got cut off there, and I've swapped memory cards, eating up a whole 32 gigabytes. I don't know. Anyway, let's hope this one works, and we can glue things together. It feels like it's working. So I'm at the conquest phase. No minors are going to be conquered. I don't think majors are either. Good old Russia has an opportunity to surrender still. But I really don't think they or France, I don't think they can come to some sort of agreement that'll work. France is still of the mind that, yeah, I can get everything I could get out of a surrender. And Russia is of that. See, here's the problem. If Russia is forced to surrender, like right now they're facing the French army. If they're forced to surrender, then maybe they do some damage to France. Austria, Spain, England may gain something out of France being forced to fight in Russia. On the other hand, if I don't surrender, I might be an equal part of the whole coalition, essentially, right? But I just don't feel like I should surrender. I just don't feel like it. It's a hard call. You got to take the victory conditions into play or whatever. But what if I defeat France? Well, then these other powers are going to get major gains on France. And I don't get to play in any of them. I just don't know. But I'm going to leave it as it is. And we're going to load this up. That allows me to get a test on this memory card. I took care of the roll for Alexander. He didn't lose anything. And I think that's really about it. We're just going to move ourselves here to the summer turn. And we may have leaders I want to swap and whatnot. I'm not really thrilled with some of the stuff that's happened. But yeah. Yeah, nothing's going to change hands. I find it so weird, like just the fact that miners don't surrender until winter is one of the many things that I'm kind of like, what is actually up with this game when it comes down to it? We need one of these for that. Anyway, I'll load this up and compile the video.